Hello everyone, and welcome to our channel. Today we've got a deeply moving story about a young woman and a powerful billionaire, bound by a mysterious ring that unlocks secrets they never knew they shared. Believe it or not, the most jaw-dropping moment happens at the very end, when they face the revelation that could change their lives forever. Imagine discovering you've been connected by family ties all along. You won't want to miss how our heroine and this billionaire navigate shocking truths and emotional hurdles to reach that heart-stopping final twist. Curious to find out exactly how their journey ends? Stick around and listen to the full story to see how bonds of trust and loyalty outshine the weight of wealth and silence. If you enjoy stories of suspense, drama, and life-changing surprises, please hit that subscribe button to support our channel. Don't forget to leave a comment below sharing your thoughts and let us know where you'd like to tune in from. We love hearing your personal take on these tales. Nina Forrest never imagined that her life would change simply by serving a cup of coffee. She had been trudging through her everyday routine, waking up in her cramped studio apartment in Queens, pulling on the same worn uniform for her shift at the Midtown Cafe, and rushing to catch the train that rattled her into Manhattan. On that particular morning, the rush of business types was the usual blur of pressed suits, polished shoes, and distracted faces. Yet amidst the morning storm of latte orders and croissant requests, one customer caught Nina's attention in an unexpected way. He was tall, finely dressed, and radiated the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to swift compliance. As she set down a fresh mug of coffee in front of him, Nina's gaze lingered on the unusual gold ring adorning his left hand. The ring gleamed, set with an emerald stone so exquisite that it seemed out of place even in the heart of Manhattan's luxury district. Without thinking, Nina blurted out the words that would alter her life. "Sir, my mother once wore a ring just like yours." She was shocked at how her voice carried, and from the sudden hush at the surrounding tables, she realized she had spoken too loudly. Still, she couldn't help staring at the emerald. Memories of her late mother, Helen Forrest, swirling through her mind. Helen, a single mother who had scraped by on multiple odd jobs, had left behind only a handful of photographs when she died the previous year. One of those pictures showed her young and carefree, wearing a ring with an emerald that looked impossibly similar to what this stranger had on his hand. The man stiffened as though her words had struck a nerve he didn't expect to be touched. He glanced at her name tag. Nina, it read, his dark gaze flicking between her face and the ring he wore. His name, as she was soon to learn, was Christopher Sterling, CEO of Sterling Innovations and one of the wealthiest men in the city. He was not known for tolerating idle chatter. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low but piercing. "What did you say?" Nina swallowed, her nerves threatening to get the best of her. I said my mother wore a ring that looked exactly like that one. It had the same emerald stone, and I think the same sort of engraving." She was certain that he would dismiss her. After all, she was just a cafe waitress, dependent on tips to keep her lights on, and he was a billionaire with board meetings and acquisitions on his daily schedule. A story about her mother's photograph probably sounded absurd to him. Christopher's expression sharpened. The ring had, according to his family lore, been one of a kind. Crafted over 6 decades ago in a small Italian workshop, it had been passed down from his grandfather to his father, and ultimately to him when his father passed away. The notion that someone else, let alone a woman from humble circumstances, might have possessed a near-identical ring was unthinkable, and yet something about the sincerity in Nina's eyes made him hesitate before dismissing her words. He was already late for an important board meeting, but he found himself unable to walk away. Something in his gut told him that this chance encounter wasn't random. Wrestling with his next move, Christopher pulled out a business card. "I'm curious about this ring. If you have that photograph, I'd like to see it," he said, holding the card out to her. Beneath his name, Nina recognized the address of the towering steel and glass skyscraper a few blocks away. Sterling Tower. She'd walked by it countless times, never imagining she would one day have reason to go inside. She accepted the card with trembling fingers, standing there in her scuffed black shoes, wondering if she had just stepped into a world that was about to reshape everything she thought she knew. 2 days passed before Nina mustered the courage to call the number on the business card. She almost convinced herself not to do it. Maybe she had made a foolish connection between the ring in her mother's photo and this billionaire's prized heirloom. Could it simply be a coincidence? But as she prepared for work one morning, she flipped through her mother's small box of keepsakes. There it was again. The photograph of Helen sitting on what looked like a luxury yacht, wearing a stunning emerald ring that could have been the twin of Christopher's. Nina's curiosity and a faint hope that she might learn more about her mother's past overcame her anxiety. She dialed the number, expecting a dismissive assistant or an automated system. Instead, she spoke to Christopher's personal secretary, who arranged a meeting the following day. That was how Nina Forrest found herself in the palatial lobby of Sterling Tower. The staff all seemed polished to a mirror sheen, moving with an assuredness that spoke of expensive educations and confidence. Nina felt like an intruder in her best blouse and skirt, which only highlighted her modest means next to these corporate high flyers. After checking in, she was guided to a private elevator that shot her up 60 floors in a hush of velvet carpeting and brass fittings. Her heart hammered the entire ride, and when the doors opened into a spacious reception area, she found herself wishing she could slink away unnoticed. But there was no going back now. A well-dressed assistant escorted her down a corridor of sleek, modern art pieces before ushering her into a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Manhattan. Christopher stood behind an imposing glass desk, his silhouette outlined against the cityscape. The office screamed power, from the meticulously arranged bookshelves to the discreet hum of electronic devices. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice clipped, but not unkind. Nina presented the photograph, her hands trembling slightly as she slid it across his pristine desk. The picture, worn at the edges, showed her mother laughing, hand raised in a casual wave, an emerald ring sparkling in the sunlight. "It was taken in 1995, Nina explained. Mom was about 22 at the time. That ring caught my eye because it looks so much like yours." Christopher leaned forward, studying the photo intently. He recognized the elaborate engraving around the emerald. It was nearly identical to the design on his own ring. The faint lines around Christopher's mouth tightened in concentration. He had always believed his ring was exclusive to his family, commissioned by his grandfather in Venice as a symbol of the sterling name and fortune. Yet here was a woman he had never heard of, wearing what seemed to be the same ring. He set the photo down and faced Nina. "What can you tell me about your mother?" he asked. Nina shrugged, her eyes misting at the memory of Helen. She explained that her mother had worked endless shifts in restaurants, never speaking much about her past or Nina's father. It was all she could do to keep them afloat financially. Nina went on to mention that her mother's maiden name was Helen Brooks, changed to Forrest after an unfortunate early marriage that didn't last. Christopher's expression remained impassive, but Nina sensed a flicker of emotion behind his reserved facade. "I know this must be bizarre," she ventured, "but if that ring truly belongs to your family, I can't help wondering how my mother got one that looks so identical. She never owned anything so expensive. It wasn't our style of life." Christopher rose to his feet, crossing to the window. From up here, the city looked like miniature boxes lined up in tidy blocks. "I've never encountered a second version of this ring. It's one of a kind, or should be. My father, Jonathan Sterling, inherited it before me. I took possession only 5 years ago, after his passing." He turned to Nina, regarding her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "I want to investigate this, Miss Forrest. If you're willing, let's see what we can find out. My father was a private man, but there might be records in the Sterling family archives that shed light on this." Nina glanced at the photograph. Her mother's radiant smile felt like a clue, or perhaps a ghostly tug at some buried secret. She nodded slowly, deciding that whatever secrets hovered behind that ring, she needed to know. "I'll help," she said, "but if we uncover anything that could tarnish my mother's memory—" "I'm not out to ruin anyone's reputation," Christopher said evenly. "I just want the truth." And so they reached a tentative agreement, two unlikely partners bound by a shared mystery, the second emerald ring that had no right to exist. They agreed to meet the following afternoon at the Sterling Family Foundation, housed in what was once the family's old mansion on the Upper East Side. Despite its stately facade and historical significance, the building rarely opened its doors to outsiders. As soon as Nina arrived, she felt the weight of money and influence in the marble floors and gilded frames. She tried not to gawk, but the opulent interior was a far cry from any place she had known in her life. Christopher was already waiting inside, conferring with a tall, older man wearing an impeccably tailored suit. The man cast Nina a quick measuring glance before offering a polite bow of his head. "Miss Forrest, this is Charles Whitfield," Christopher introduced. "He was my father's personal assistant for more than 3 decades and now manages the Foundation's archives. Charles, we're looking for records that might explain how another ring identical to ours existed. More specifically, we need any mention of a Helen Brooks or anyone with a similar name from around 1995. Affirm. Charles nodded, but Nina didn't miss the flash of surprise in his eyes when her mother's name was mentioned. "I'll do my best," he said in a measured tone. "Mr. Sterling's personal records from that period are quite extensive. He traveled widely and had considerable holdings." They followed Charles down a corridor lined with family portraits, dignified faces of Sterlings from generations past. The eyes in those paintings seemed to follow Nina, as though questioning her right to be there. At the end of the hall, Charles opened a heavy wooden door to reveal a dimly lit study. Rows of leather-bound volumes lined mahogany shelves, and dust motes drifted in the golden light that spilled from antique lamps. Nina felt as though she had stepped into another century. As Charles flipped through ledgers and journals with practiced efficiency, Nina couldn't help but watch Christopher. He exuded an aura of command even as he waited, hands clasped behind his back. The hush of the room was broken only by the quiet rustle of pages turning, punctuated by Charles's occasional murmurs of, or interesting. Finally, he paused over a logbook inscribed with the year 1995 in gold lettering. His face tightened. "These are records relating to the Sterling family's yacht," Charles explained. "Jonathan Sterling hosted cruises each summer for select associates, potential business partners, and acquaintances. He was known to invite performers, artists, or, on occasion, staff who provided hospitality services." He turned the logbook around so that Christopher and Nina could see a list of names dated July 1995. Midway down the list, in elegant script, was one that made Nina's heart pound: Helen Brooks. Next to it, in neat parentheses, were the words, "service staff." She pressed a hand to her mouth. Her mother had never spoken of working on a yacht, let alone for a family as wealthy as the Sterlings. For Nina, Helen's life before motherhood had always been an empty canvas, painted only with vague references to waitressing or helping cater events. The possibility that her mother had served on a billionaire's private yacht was both shocking and oddly plausible. Charles ran his finger down the column and stopped at a small note. "There's a mention here. Misplaced ring on deck. Search in progress. Helen assisting." He cleared his throat. "It seems an emerald ring was reported missing around that time. Jonathan Sterling personally noted it. He was deeply attached to that particular piece. Eventually, the ring was declared found. No theft reported. No insurance claim filed." A chill trickled through Nina. Could her mother have been falsely accused? Or perhaps she was merely helping in the search. As she tried to reconcile these thoughts, Christopher's expression hardened. "Our records say the ring was returned," he said. "But why was Helen listed as someone assisting? Did my father suspect her? Or did she know where it was?" Charles hesitated. Nina could sense that he was holding something back. "Your father was a man of strong passions and many secrets," Charles said finally, his tone guarded. "He didn't share them easily, even with me. The first major turning point in this unfolding mystery is the existence of a ring that should never have existed in duplicate. Its sudden appearance in Helen's photograph propels Christopher and Nina into a shared quest for answers, revealing how a seemingly minor detail, a glimpse of an heirloom during a routine cafe shift, can unravel decades' worth of family secrets. Christopher thanked Charles and closed the logbook, while Nina stood by with her thoughts spinning. The library's walls seemed to press in on her, reverberating with secrets from a past that had gone unspoken for far too long. She couldn't stop staring at her mother's name, etched neatly into the pages of a billionaire's archive. It felt surreal, forcing her to reconcile the memory of Helen toiling in budget diners with the image of her serving on an opulent yacht. Had her mother once brushed elbows with the city's elite? They left the study, retreating to a more modern meeting room nearby. Nina sank into one of the leather chairs, still clutching the old photograph of Helen wearing that emerald ring. Christopher took the seat opposite her, setting his own ring on the table. A silent yet powerful statement that the puzzle was real. Even so, he still couldn't fully accept it. My father was engaged to my mother, Claudia, in 1995, Christopher said, almost to himself. Their wedding took place in early 1996. I was born a year later. Why would he have been socializing so closely with a member of the yacht staff? It was a question to which Nina had no immediate answer. She only knew that her mother had always been resolute about one thing. They had never needed anyone's charity. When Nina was younger, she had pressed Helen about her father's identity, but Helen would clam up and deflect. Over time, Nina stopped asking, convinced it was too painful a topic. Now the revelation that Helen might have been close to Jonathan Sterling opened possibilities Nina struggled to process. Charles returned with a slim folder. I found a few more documents, though they're not conclusive, he said. Inside were pages of typed notes, bits of correspondence, and receipts. One note, dated August 1995, mentioned a Helen B. in the context of an extended yacht trip along the Amalfi Coast. Next to it was a scrawled message, presumably from Jonathan. Ring recovered. Must speak to H. Nina traced the words with her fingertip. What if my mother and your father had a personal relationship? She asked softly, almost dreading Christopher's reaction. That might explain why she appeared wearing the ring. Christopher stiffened. If she did, that implies my father... He couldn't finish the thought. It would mean Jonathan Sterling had carried on a clandestine affair while engaged to Christopher's mother. Nina also felt a pang of shame on Helen's behalf, though her mother had never been the type to knowingly hurt anyone. Perhaps the lines between them blurred in ways neither had intended. Charles tried to offer a balanced perspective. Jonathan often brought new acquaintances onto that yacht. Sometimes they were musicians, sometimes hospitality staff. But I recall he developed something of a reputation for taking a keen interest in certain people's personal lives. He had a generous streak when he felt someone had potential or was in need. It was Christopher's turn to examine the photograph anew. Helen Brooks, born in, do we know where? He glanced at Nina. She grew up in Philadelphia, but she spent time in New York as a teen after running away from a difficult foster situation, Nina said quietly. By the time she was 22, it's possible she'd have been working multiple jobs just to stay afloat. Christopher nodded slowly. The idea of his father's ring ending up on the finger of a young woman in dire financial straits was unsettling, but not impossible. I need more clarity, he declared. Let's have a DNA test done. I'm not accusing your mother of anything, he added quickly, catching the flash of anger in Nina's eyes. But if there's any chance that my father... Nina's cheeks grew hot. She knew exactly where Christopher's line of thought led. If Jonathan Sterling had been involved with Helen in 1995, then there was a possibility that Nina wasn't just a random witness to this ring mystery. She might actually share blood with the Sterling family, specifically with Christopher. You want to see if I'm a Sterling, Nina stated, voice trembling. He regarded her solemnly. I think we have to. If there's any truth here, we need facts, not guesses. But Nina recoiled. So I'm just another item on your to-do list? A line item that you can check off with a lab result? My mother was a person with dignity, not some secret fling. Christopher exhaled, a flicker of regret crossing his features. Believe me, if the roles were reversed, I'd be just as upset. But I can't walk away from this without knowing. If the ring truly was in your mother's possession, if she and my father were close, then what else are we missing? She couldn't deny the gravity of his question. A small, defiant part of Nina wanted to reject his proposal outright. Yet the unanswered questions about her father, the father her mother had never named, gnawed at her. All right, she whispered, her throat tight. We'll do the test. But if I find out you're just using me for some twisted corporate reason... You have my word, Christopher interjected. This is personal. No matter the outcome, I'll respect your mother's memory. This second major juncture intensifies the stakes. The possibility that Nina might be Jonathan Sterling's daughter, and by extension Christopher's half-sibling, shifts the narrative from a mere puzzle about a missing heirloom to a life-altering inquiry into identity, loyalty, and the burdens of inherited secrets. For the next several days, Nina felt like she was standing on the brink of a precipice. She had agreed to the DNA test, and a swab had been taken under respectful yet clinical procedures arranged by Christopher's assistant. The sample was now being analyzed in a top-tier genetics lab, courtesy of Sterling Innovations Medical Partnerships. While she waited for those results, Nina continued her shifts at the cafe, though her mind was rarely on her customers' orders. Her thoughts circled around the question, who am I, really? Was she the daughter of a single mother who had hustled for every scrap of a living? Or was she the hidden offspring of a powerful billionaire scion? Christopher, for his part, was equally distracted. His usual laser focus on corporate mergers and acquisitions was fractured. Whenever he tried to delve into complex spreadsheets or negotiation strategies, his mind veered to that photograph of Helen Brooks, smiling, carefree, with the signature emerald ring shining on her finger. The public saw Christopher as an unshakable business titan, but privately he wrestled with the gnawing fear that his father's legacy was not as honorable as he'd always believed. If Jonathan Sterling had indeed fathered Nina and then abandoned both mother and child, what did that say about the values Christopher had inherited? While they waited, Christopher took an uncharacteristic step back from his relentless corporate schedule. He had a sleek black sedan pick up Nina early one morning. She hesitated only a moment before sliding into the plush leather interior, unsure what he wanted to show her. They traversed Manhattan's grid, slipping away from the congested streets into quieter neighborhoods until they arrived at a quaint marina along the Hudson. Christopher led Nina onto a modest sailboat named the Radiant Dawn, a stark contrast to the lavish yacht Nina pictured from her mother's old photograph. The boat rocked gently as they walked the deck. Christopher appeared more at ease here than in his office tower, as though the demands of commerce melted in the presence of open water. He showed her how to hoist the sails where the emergency supplies were stored and how to read the wind. Nina watched him with mild amazement. She had expected a stoic lecture, maybe more questions about her mother, but instead Christopher was teaching her something intimately personal about himself. "Sometimes I just need to escape," he admitted, adjusting a rope. "My father used to think sailing was too small scale for a Sterling. He preferred massive yachts, staff, and extravagance. But I like the quiet. I can handle this boat on my own." Nina nodded, letting the breeze ruffle her hair. "My mom said life's simplest joys could eclipse any luxury if you share them with people who care." Christopher cast her a searching glance. "She sounds like she was a remarkable person." Nina's eyes grew misty. "She was. She gave up a lot for me, always choosing work over rest so I could go to college. It still hurts that she never told me who my father was. Maybe she feared I'd be disappointed or worse. I'm beginning to see it might have been more complicated than that." Christopher guided the boat out of the slip, and they sailed past the urban skyline. For a moment, neither spoke, simply taking in the gentle motion of the water. "I'm sorry for pushing you," he said at last. "If the test shows that we're siblings, I want you to know—" His words caught in his throat. Nina felt an unexpected surge of empathy. Whether they were related or not, Christopher was caught between the father he'd idolized and a reality that might break his trust in that memory. "We'll deal with whatever comes," she said softly. "We can't change the past, but we can decide how to move forward." This moment on Christopher's sailboat serves as the third crucial pivot. Instead of remaining adversaries or mere investigators, Nina and Christopher begin to build an emotional bridge that transcends social class, wealth, and suspicion. The trust forming between them foreshadows that their shared past, whether by blood or circumstance, will hold deeper meaning than either suspected. The results arrived on a crisp Monday morning. Nina was at the cafe, clearing tables and wiping down a countertop, when she got the text from Christopher. "Tests are in. Please come to my office as soon as you can." Her heart climbed into her throat. She murmured a quick excuse to her manager and dashed out, adrenaline making her hands shake. The subway ride felt agonizingly slow, each stop a reminder of the distance between her old life and the answers awaiting her at Sterling Tower. When the elevator opened on Christopher's executive floor, Nina found him waiting with tension etched across his face. Wordlessly, he led her into a private conference room and handed her the printed results. She scanned the jargon until her gaze locked on the bold statement, "Probability of half-sibling relationship, 99.9%. Her stomach lurched. She was Jonathan Sterling's daughter, and by extension, Christopher's half-sister. She looked up, blinking back tears she didn't fully understand. "So that's it," she whispered, voice cracking. "My mother's silence, the ring, all of it was because my father was Jonathan Sterling. Your father." Christopher nodded, struggling to remain composed. I spent my life believing I was an only child, that my father's legacy was a single line. But here you are, and you're as much sterling as I am. Emotions collided in Nina's chest. Anger that her mother had kept this secret, pity for the situation Helen must have faced, and a raw sense of betrayal that Jonathan had never publicly acknowledged her. Yet a flicker of relief broke through the confusion. Finally, proof of who she was. Over the next hour, Christopher shared what he'd learned from additional records Charles uncovered. There was a stash of letters Jonathan wrote but never sent, referencing HB, and a child he could not claim. According to those documents, Jonathan had tried to provide financial support anonymously, but Helen had accepted only a minimal amount to cover medical expenses. She refused to let him buy her silence with large sums, presumably because she didn't want Nina to grow up overshadowed by the sterling name. Nina felt an ache in her chest as she read one letter Jonathan had penned in desperation. Helen, please consider my offer. I cannot leave you and the baby to struggle alone. If it becomes public knowledge, I will face personal disgrace, but I'd rather endure that than abandon you entirely. She imagined her mother reading those words, choosing independence and dignity over the uncertain compromise Jonathan proposed. It appears he cared more than I expected, Christopher said quietly, interpreting Nina's thoughtful silence. My father made questionable decisions, but he didn't simply forget you. Tears threatened to spill from Nina's eyes, but she steeled herself. Why couldn't he just come out and admit the truth? She asked. It's not like your mother, Claudia, would have thrown him out on the street. Or would she? Christopher sighed. My mother is a strong woman, but the Sterling family was tied to corporate alliances, boards, and shareholders who might have balked at a scandal. Father was under immense pressure to protect the family name and wealth. Looking at these letters, I think he was torn between doing right by you and Helen and avoiding a public scandal that would upend everything. A cold sense of reality settled over Nina. Money, power, and social standing had dictated her entire life without her even knowing it. That knowledge stung, even as it explained so much. So what happens now? She asked. Am I supposed to become an official Sterling? Inherit shares and seats on boards? Enjoy the big shining penthouse? Christopher met her gaze steadily. That decision is yours, but I would like to, he paused, forming his words carefully, acknowledge you as family, if you want it. Nina stared at the test results, feeling the weight of decades pressing down on her. Family wasn't a label you just slapped onto a set of documents. It was built, nurtured, sometimes painfully grown. I need time, she said, voice trembling. I'm not sure if I want to step into that world. I'm not sure if I can. Here, with the DNA results confirmed, the fourth decisive moment arrives. Proof that the billionaire's ring mystery was rooted in a hidden kinship all along. This revelation thrusts Nina into an identity crisis that challenges both her self-image and the Sterling family's public facade, leaving everyone to ponder the line between duty, love, and personal truth. Over the following weeks, Christopher tried repeatedly to reach out. He left voicemails, sent polite messages, even dropped by the cafe once or twice, only to find that Nina had either taken extra shifts elsewhere or stepped away. He soon learned that her apartment lease was up and that she had moved. Whether it was a planned change or a reaction to the new knowledge, Christopher couldn't say. It took him some detective work and a little bit of influence to locate her new address, but she hadn't responded to his overtures. Meanwhile, Nina wrestled with her own emotional tumult. She now possessed the last name Sterling by blood, a key to a vault of wealth and recognition she had never sought. Anxious and sleepless nights brought her to the edge of resentment toward a father she never knew, and a half-brother who reminded her too much of the corporate machine she despised. Yet part of her remained curious, maybe even hopeful. Christopher, in their few personal moments together, had shown glimpses of empathy. He wasn't the cold, cutthroat mogul the tabloids made him out to be. But was that enough to bridge the gulf between them? One afternoon, Nina volunteered at a free clinic in the Lower East Side, a place where she had once received basic care as a teenager when Helen's meager insurance proved insufficient. The bustle of staff and patients felt comforting in its familiarity. She was there to donate time as an almost nurse. She'd passed her exams and was waiting for official registration, assisting with paperwork and guiding patients to the correct rooms. Amid the chaos, she heard her name called in a soft voice. Turning, she found Christopher standing in the corridor, a bouquet of daisies in his hand. Daisies, not these stereotypical roses, as though he knew enough to pick something humble. She stepped aside, out of the patient flow. "How did you find me?" she asked, half in exasperation. He looked around at the clinic's chipped walls and cluttered waiting area. "You mentioned once that you wanted to work at places like this, so I made a few inquiries. I'm not here to intrude, but I wanted to understand why you're avoiding me." Nina folded her arms. "I don't know how to handle all this. One day, I'm a nobody waiting tables, and the next, I'm a supposed heir to a global empire. It feels like a movie script, not real life." Christopher nodded, offering her the daisies. She hesitated, then took them. They were simple, bright, and unexpectedly heartening. "I understand your need for space," he said carefully. "My entire childhood was shaped by father's controlling presence and mother's high expectations. I can't imagine adding secret sibling to the list of complications." She studied the flowers. "My mother's diaries, the few I found, said she didn't want me to grow up overshadowed by the Sterling name. She thought it would define me, like it defined Jonathan. That's why she kept quiet." Christopher placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "But it doesn't have to define you, Nina. That's your choice. All I want is the chance to get to know my sister. No press releases, no boardroom meetings about it. Just us." Blinking away tears, Nina gave a shaky nod. She was still uncomfortable with the idea of stepping into the Sterling sphere. But she could see Christopher was sincere. She remembered their sailboat outing, how for a moment it had felt like two real people without illusions or pretenses. "All right," she said at last. "We'll talk, but not today. I've got a shift to finish, and these patients need me." "Take your time," Christopher said with a small smile. "I'll be here when you're ready." As he left, Nina realized that for all the confusion, a part of her yearned for what she'd lacked. A father, a family, a sense of belonging. Perhaps in understanding Jonathan's choices and forging a connection with Christopher, she could heal some of the old wounds her mother had carried in silence. A week later, Christopher extended an invitation that was both surprising and oddly tender. He wanted Nina to meet Claudia Sterling, Jonathan's widow and Christopher's mother. Nina balked at first, picturing a regal matriarch who might scorn her as an unwelcome reminder of Jonathan's infidelity. But Christopher insisted his mother knew more than anyone realized. "She's been unwell recently, but she has moments of clarity," he explained. "And believe it or not, she's known about you for years." Nina's stomach churned at the idea that an entire wealthy family had tracked her existence from a distance. Still, she agreed to accompany Christopher to the private assisted living facility in Connecticut, where Claudia currently resided. The drive up was quiet, broken only by occasional comments on the scenic route. Nina noticed Christopher wringing his hands, an uncharacteristic gesture that revealed his anxiety. When they reached the facility, a nurse guided them to a spacious, sunlit room filled with fresh flowers. Claudia Sterling sat by a window that overlooked a rolling green lawn. Dressed in a soft cardigan and neatly pressed pants, she radiated an understated elegance. Though her hair was silvered and her face lined with age, she had a keen glint in her eyes. Nina lingered at the threshold, feeling like an intruder. Claudia beckoned her closer, a soft smile forming. "Come in, child. You must be Nina." Her voice was gentle, and there was not a shred of hostility in it. Nina exhaled, stepping forward. Christopher gave his mother a brief hug, then introduced Nina more formally. "Mother, this is Helen Brooks's daughter," he said, choosing Helen's maiden name for clarity. "We've confirmed that." Claudia raised a hand. "Jonathan's child, yes. I already know." She studied Nina, her gaze traveling from Nina's auburn hair to her earnest eyes. "You look so much like Helen did at your age." She was radiant, even in photographs. Nina's voice wavered. "You knew her?" Claudia sighed, glancing out the window as if recalling a painful memory. "Helen was a server on the yacht during the summer of 1995. I was occupied with wedding preparations, but I'd heard rumors that your father, Jonathan, had formed an attachment. I confronted him once, but he swore it was just a fleeting friendship." She inhaled deeply. Over time, I found out he'd sent money for your upbringing, under the guise of charities and scholarships. Helen refused most of it, but accepted just enough to ensure you could pursue nursing school. I respected her for that. She had backbone. Nina stared, emotions surging, anger, curiosity, and a quiet sense of relief all tangled in her chest. So you let it happen? You let my mother raise me alone, while you and Jonathan stayed married? Claudia's eyes misted. It wasn't letting her, dear. Jonathan and Helen both chose to keep their relationship a secret. Helen didn't want you growing up in this world of corporate scrutiny, and I had Christopher to think of. Once the wedding was done, once we had a united front for the shareholders, it was too late to unwind the arrangements. We were all entangled in financial obligations, ties to other influential families. But I tried to ensure Jonathan did not shirk responsibility, even if it had to be from a distance. Tears pricked Nina's eyes. She recalled those times her mother hid certain letters or checks, never explaining who had sent them. She'd always suspected there was some benefactor, but never in her wildest dreams did she imagine it was Jonathan Sterling's hush money. You must have hated me, Nina said in a small voice, knowing I was proof that Jonathan... Claudia shook her head, reaching out with a trembling hand. I never hated you. I pitied the situation, and I envied Helen's conviction. She refused to surrender her autonomy to the Sterling name, something I had done almost willingly for the sake of a stable life. Nina's eyes filled, and for a moment, she let Claudia hold her hand. Whatever secrets and resentments the older woman might have harbored, she seemed genuine in her remorse. Christopher observed in silence, a subtle tension easing from his posture as he saw his mother and Nina connecting on a human level, rather than as mere symbols of a scandal. In the months that followed, Nina began a cautious but real relationship with Christopher, and in her own way, with Claudia. She would visit the assisted living facility, sometimes bringing fresh flowers or a homemade treat. On rare occasions, Claudia was lucid enough to share more recollections, snapshots of Jonathan's internal battle, his desire to claim Nina as his own child, and the weight of the Sterling empire that made a simple, honest life almost impossible. Eventually, Christopher invited Nina to move her nursing ambitions forward through a new branch of the Sterling Family Foundation dedicated to medical outreach in underserved areas. Initially, Nina was hesitant. She didn't want to become a figurehead or a pity project, but Christopher assured her that she would have full autonomy to shape the program. You have the skills and the passion. I have the resources. Together, we can actually do some good, he insisted. After soul-searching conversations with her close friends and reviewing the foundation's mission, Nina accepted, determined to stay true to her mother's legacy of genuine compassion. The two half-siblings found themselves in the unlikeliest of partnerships. Nina, who had grown up in near poverty, discovered that the Sterling name could open doors in the philanthropic world. Doors that, ironically, allowed her to help the very communities she came from. Meanwhile, Christopher, who had long wielded business power with dispassionate efficiency, discovered a new sense of purpose in supporting Nina's projects. He reorganized entire divisions within Sterling Innovations to funnel profits into charitable avenues, an effort that shocked many on the board, but found unwavering support from key executives. One sunny afternoon, Nina and Christopher revisited the Radiant Dawn, the sailboat Christopher used for solitary escapes. This time, they brought along a small box of personal items that Nina had finally gathered from her mother's belongings. Chief among them was the photograph that started it all. Helen Brooks, smiling in the summer sun, wearing the ring. They looked at it together, the water reflecting dancing lights across the deck. I used to resent my mother for never telling me who my father was, Nina admitted quietly. Now I think I understand. She was protecting me from a life where I'd be some sort of corporate pawn or the subject of an ugly scandal. Christopher nodded. I spent my life only seeing one side of my father. It doesn't excuse him keeping you a secret, but I hope you can find it in you to forgive him, or at least acknowledge he tried in his own flawed way. Nina closed the box gently. I'm not sure if I can forgive the man, but I can appreciate that he cared, even if it was too late. My mother always said that love and regret tend to arrive out of order. They shared a quiet laugh, each grappling with the legacy left behind by Helen and Jonathan. The ring itself, that once sacred heirloom, was no longer a symbol of betrayal or secrecy. Nina had placed a smaller replica pendant around her neck, a gift Christopher had commissioned to honor the unity they were forging. She no longer saw it as a burden, but rather as a testament to the strange, fragile bonds that make up a family. Sailing back toward the Manhattan skyline, Nina stood at the bow, feeling the wind on her face, the new pendant resting just above her heart. On the horizon, the silhouettes of skyscrapers loomed. Among them, Sterling Tower, symbol of a world she had once thought belonged only to others. Now, it was a place she could enter with her head held high, not because she was entitled to it, but because she had the right to choose her own path. Christopher steered the boat, occasionally glancing at her. In that unspoken moment, Nina realized how far they had come since the day she approached him in the cafe with a pot of coffee and a daring statement about her mother's ring. Their journey had uncovered betrayal, loyalty, and love entangled in a single piece of emerald jewelry. But it had also led them to each other, a surprising family tie that promised new beginnings. They docked the boat as dusk settled in pink and orange hues over the city. Gathering their belongings, Nina paused on the pier, inhaling the sweet, salty air. She turned to Christopher. "Thank you for everything." He gave a tentative smile. "No, Nina. Thank you for showing me a side of life my father never taught me to see. We've got a lot of work ahead, but for the first time, it feels like the Sterling name might stand for something more than money." Nina nodded, tucking the photograph into her bag. "Let's do it differently than our parents did," she said. "We might still make mistakes, but we won't hide the truth." Arm in arm, they left the marina, two heirs of a complex legacy, determined to shape the future on their own terms. United by a ring that once symbolized the ghosts of a hidden past and now signified a shared promise for the days yet to come. Thank you so much for joining us on this emotional ride. As our story has shown, even the most unassuming moments, like a simple conversation over coffee, can spiral into life-altering discoveries. When love, legacy, and hidden truths collide, it's impossible not to be captivated. Now that you've witnessed how secrets come to light and how the characters wrestle with loyalty versus duty, we want to hear from you. Have you ever encountered a surprising family story or life mystery? What would you do if you learned that you belong to a powerful family overnight? Drop your experiences or thoughts in the comments. And remember, we have more enthralling stories coming your way soon. By subscribing and hitting that notification bell, you'll never miss a new chapter. Thanks again for your support. Let's keep this journey of stories and revelations going.